Bye-bye biological reality. The Biden administration has rewritten Title IX regulations to include gender identity in Department of Education rules prohibiting sex-based discrimination. This means any school that receives federal funds must allow biological males to participate in female sports. Well, here with more is Angelo Morabito, former press secretary of the Department of Education and now spokesperson for the Defense of Freedom Institute. Angela, it's good to talk with you again. So first, explain what Title IX is and why rewriting the rules is significant.
Well, it's great to be with you, Gary, and I wish I had better news to share. Title IX has stood for 50 years to prevent discrimination on the basis of sex in educational activities and programs receiving federal funding. And the Biden administration's new rule, it's really not an executive order, it's a rule that's come from the Department of Ed, is redefining sex in the law to include gender identity. So now, instead of treating students at school based on their biological sex, schools are going to be required to treat them based on the gender that they feel that they are. This creates a huge problem, particularly when it comes to sports, because the Biden administration has just decided that allowing men and women's sports is no longer a Title IX violation. Same with restrooms and locker rooms. And it creates a huge problem for everyone. It's a massive step back for due process and for the rights of women in schools.
Well, as you mentioned, we know this will have a chilling effect on women's sports. So why aren't more feminists and progressives speaking out about this? Because isn't this a violation of the rights of the majority, women and girls? It discriminates against them as they try to protect others.
Absolutely. And that is the million-dollar question. Anyone who says that they believe in women's rights should be upset by this new rule, and they should be standing up against it. And the Biden administration has been very careful to say, oh, no, we're not devastating women's sports, but they absolutely are. They've just decided they're not going to enforce Title IX the way it was written, and that states now can allow men and women's sports, locker rooms, restrooms, dorms, wherever, and the Biden administration will simply sit on its hands and do nothing about it. They also have a separate rule that is specifically about athletics that is coming expected later in the year, although no one is exactly certain. And that rule is expected to force schools to allow men and women's sports. So it's a very sad day for women in schools, especially female athletes. And the Biden administration is just intent on making things worse.
And it isn't only a sports competition. Rules like these have already been imposed on Christian colleges. Similar rules at HUD were imposed on College of the Ozarks. I'm sure you remember that one, requiring them to allow males and females to share shower and bathroom facilities. So what's the likelihood that Title IX, this rule change, will force co-ed showers and bathrooms everywhere, public schools, or at least require biological male transgenders to use female locker rooms everywhere?
It is tremendously frightening. And, while Title IX does certainly cover colleges, it also applies from kindergarten, even pre-K, all the way up through the education system. And one of the things it does that people need to be aware of is it forces schools to treat students based on their gender identity. And that includes the name and pronouns that they want to use. So if someone is repeatedly, quote unquote, misgendered or dead named, or a teacher decides, no, I'm going to call a he and a she is she, and I'm not going to play into what that child happens to believe about themselves that day, that teacher could be found to be creating a hostile environment. That's a problem. The teacher should not have their speech compelled or controlled by the government. They shouldn't be forced to play into what a child believes about themselves rather than uphold the truth. Now, here's the kicker. Is the Biden administration thinks misgendering can create a hostile environment, but a man in a woman's locker room cannot. It is just plain ridiculous. And I think the American public see that. They don't want this rule.
So Angela, what's being done to try to reverse this executive action? I guess it isn't an executive action. It just is Biden administration policy of the Department of Education.
It is. So the rule is slated to take effect in August, and there are quite a few things that could happen both before and after then. While I can't speak to exactly what will happen in the immediate aftermath, I know that Congress has a chance to take a stand here and say no. There's always the Congressional Review Act is an option. There is also the potential for a new administration to come in and just yank the rule and say this is absolutely wrong. It is an inversion of the law that robs the civil rights law of its initial meaning and replaces it with radical politics. So an upcoming administration has the chance to make a change as well.
Well, I mean, you get a new administration, and then they take it and make it one way, and then a new one comes in after that, changes it like we've seen. How do we get around that?
Well, I think it's important to note that there was, prior to this Biden administration rule, a 2020 rule from former Secretary Betsy DeVos that was working. It had great due process protections in place that was protecting all students. There was no need for the Biden administration to go in and create a new rule that overwrote one that was working really, really well. So this isn't a matter of reinventing the wheel. It should be a matter of going back to the 2020 DeVos rule that was working, that was upholding students' civil rights.
Okay, I'm sure there will be lawsuits as well. Angelo Morabito of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Thank you, Angela, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.